Tonight, tragedy on the water. Three young people killed in a boat crash in Ontario.
It's a horrible situation. There were still people in the water when first responders arrived.
5 others injured in a nighttime collision involving a speedboat. Plus, the fires that come back. Zombie wildfires plaguing Western Canada.
We have seen them in past seasons, although not to the degree that we're seeing them this year.
Making things more dangerous, triggering an earlier start to the wildfire season. And 96 years young and taking to the skies.
I can't believe that I'm so lucky.
One grandma's dream flight in the clouds, all thanks to her grandson.
Pure joy.
CTV National News with Heather Butts. Reporting tonight, Todd Vanderhayden.
Good evening. A tragedy this long weekend in Ontario. 3 people in their early 20s killed in a boat crash. 5 others hurt, including 1 seriously injured. It happened Saturday night on a lake north of Kingston known as Bob's Lake. It's about 140 kilometers south of Ottawa. A speedboat collided with a fishing boat around 9:30 in the evening. Police are trying to determine what went wrong out on the water. But the deadly crash renewing calls for better boat safety with the summer fast approaching. CTV's Jack Richardson reports.
A heavy police presence on Buck Bay as Ontario Provincial Police investigate a long weekend tragedy. 2 women and a man between the ages of 21 and 23 were killed in a collision between a speedboat and a fishing boat around 9:30 Saturday night.
Collisions like this are thankfully very rare, but they do happen. And when they do, the consequences are horrific.
5 others were seriously injured and transported to a hospital in Kingston. One of the 5 was airlifted from the scene due to the severity of their injuries. Witnesses tell CTV News they heard a loud bang ring out late at night.
Numerous people ended up being thrown into the water. First responders arrived as quickly as possible, utilizing boats, getting out into the water to retrieve the victims and get them back to shore. We had to utilize one of our aerial devices, a drone, to try and locate the bodies. So this was a horrible scene.
Frontenac OPP say there were others who were checked by paramedics at the scene, but did not specify how many. The cause of the accident remains unknown, but the OPP Collisions Unit will continue its investigation.
They will be looking at all aspects of this. Were the boats running properly? What was going on? Were rules being followed? Were people wearing their life jackets?
Nearby cottagers preferred not to appear on camera, but to say people are shocked would be an understatement. Some said Buck Bay is relatively quiet later at night. It's rare to see boats out so late. Some said they heard a bang from all the way across the bay. Others said they thought it was fireworks. But the news that 3 people were killed in this tragic accident has left a feeling of devastation. Jack Richardson, CTV News, Buck Bay.
In Western Canada, confirmation tonight that 4 homes have been destroyed, at least 10 other properties damaged by a wildfire that continues to threaten communities in northern British Columbia.
For those families, I feel really, really bad. And, I hope that we're going to be able to do everything we can to help them.
An evacuation order remains in place for residents of Fort Nelson, BC. The mayor says he hopes residents will be allowed to return in the coming days, but they could be waiting another week. The fire is not expanding, but the situation unpredictable, with the area experiencing volatile winds. They're known as zombie wildfires, fires that burn below the surface through the winter and can surge back to life in the spring. Across Western Canada, zombie fires are making life more difficult right now for firefighters. CTV's Kamal Karamali has that.
This out-of-control wildfire in the Northwest Territories was once dormant, smoldering underground for months, now sparked back to life.
As we move into spring and our fuels start to dry out again, those fires almost wake back up.
Just one of the so-called zombie fires that lay in hiding over the winter months.
There's no guarantee that as the snow continues to melt in some regions, that more of these don't appear.
More than 100 of these holdover fires laying idle across Western Canada, the large number due to last year's record-breaking wildfires.
It's a concern, it doesn't just affect last year, it also affects this year, obviously, as well.
Now, zombie fires believed to be playing a role in the early start to the season. In BC, roughly 90 of the holdover fires crammed into the region surrounding Fort Nelson, which is under evacuation order. One of them, the Patry Creek wildfire, has already reignited and spread out of control. It all starts with the initial wildfire, which then spreads into the underground peat layer. And although the cooler conditions later in the year may play a role in putting out the initial fire, it still continues to smolder below the surface. The fire can also spread not only deeper, but laterally too. Once the weather warms up, fires can come back to life where they first started, or even reappear in another location nearby. They're tough to put out while underground.
They're nearly impossible to do it with manpower. They're so deep into the ground.
And what that means for future wildfire seasons.
They could become more prevalent as the climate does change.
Now, wildfire officials are hoping to use this surge in holdover fire figures to learn some lessons in prevention, perhaps searching for new ways to put them out during the winter months. Todd.
CTV's Kamal Karamali. To Iran now, where a helicopter carrying the country's president and its foreign minister has crashed. Their fate is still unclear tonight. A massive search and rescue operation was launched as crews tried to locate the exact site of the crash. Their efforts have been hampered by rain and fog and mountainous terrain. The president, Ibrahim Raisi, pictured here shortly before the flight, was returning from the border with Azerbaijan when the crash occurred. An immediate ceasefire, stop the fighting. Those words today from U.S. President Joe Biden on the war in Gaza. It is the clearest statement Biden has made yet on the conflict. It comes as we're getting a first-hand look at Israeli soldiers on the ground in the city of Rafah and word of dozens more civilian deaths in Gaza. CTV's Jeremy Sharon has the latest.
Firing at enemy targets, fending off a Hamas resurgence in northern Gaza. Israel says forces are fighting and carrying out strikes across the enclave, including in Rafah. These images showing troops operating inside the city where hundreds of thousands had sought shelter before being ordered to evacuate.
The fact that he's continuing to attack in Rafah, where all the bulk of the people are, is dangerous and is disturbing.
Overnight strikes in central and northern Gaza killed dozens, including at this refugee camp. I'm the only one who was awake for these strikes, this man says. I started rescuing those who were screaming, the children and the women. I got out as many people as I could.
At this point, a political solution is necessary. Weapons will not bring Israel more safety at this point in terms of further attacks on the Gaza Strip.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met today with White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan amid division within his own cabinet over his plan for the war, with the top minister threatening to leave government. While at a commencement speech in Atlanta, President Joe Biden added more political pressure today.
It's a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. That's why I've called for an immediate ceasefire. An immediate ceasefire to stop the fighting. Bring the hostages home.
Washington has been pushing Israel not to move forward with its invasion of Rafah, but Netanyahu has said it is needed to win the war. Todd?
CTV's Jeremy Sharon. And that commencement speech that Joe Biden gave was also the president's most significant interaction with students ever since pro-Palestinian encampments took over many university campuses across the United States weeks ago.
I want to say this very clearly. I support peaceful, nonviolent protest. Your voices should be heard.
Several students at Morehouse College held their own protests with their backs turned to the president during his speech. Biden didn't acknowledge them, but did recognize what he called the anger and frustration felt by many. Meantime, a big week ahead for Donald Trump. His criminal trial in New York City is entering its final stretch. We're expecting closing arguments from both the prosecution and the defense this week. Then it will be up to the jury. While Trump has suggested taking the stand in his own defense, that seems highly unlikely.
I don't expect Donald Trump to take the stand. We know that the prosecution has said they expect to put on one, maybe two witnesses. So we'll watch and see if they put on any witnesses in this case at this point.
Trump facing more than 30 charges related to the falsifying of business records to conceal payments made to an adult film star, Stormy Daniels, who says she had an affair with Trump. The prosecution saying that money was an illegal campaign contribution because it was paid to buy Daniels' silence and avoid a sex scandal that could have torpedoed Trump's presidential campaign in 2016. High-profile American rapper and music mogul Sean Diddy Combs has gone from a denial to an admission and an apology. It comes 2 days after hotel surveillance video from Los Angeles taken in 2016 shows him beating his then-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura, and a warning the images are disturbing.
But I make no excuses. My behavior on that video is inexcusable. I take full responsibility for my actions in that video. Disgusted.
The video obtained by CNN shows Combs kicking, dragging, and throwing objects at Ventura. She settled a lawsuit with Combs in November over accusations of rape and sex trafficking.
I'm sure it'll embolden prosecutors to look for hotel footage and other places that he stayed at and search everywhere for additional information on potential violent crimes that he's had. For his civil cases, it'll also embolden those plaintiffs. They might be able to use the evidence as what we call Me Too evidence to show his propensity for violence against women.
Combs now faces numerous lawsuits involving allegations of sex trafficking, assault, and rape, all of which he denies. It seems Canadians are not optimistic about the direction our country is heading or our political leaders. A new poll from Nanos Research shows both Justin Trudeau, Pierre Poilievre scoring poorly on the issue of credibility.
What it means is that people are not happy with either one of those individuals, and they score their credibility low. So I guess the good news for Pierre Poilievre is 3.9, versus 3.7. But, if this was a swimming pool, they'd both be drowning on credibility. They're not above water.
On a score out of 10, Canadians put Pierre Poilievre at 3.9 and Justin Trudeau at just 3.7. The struggle over high prices at mainstream grocery stores in Canada, leading some to consider alternatives like grocery co-ops. Those are customer-owned stores, and those behind them say they are a smart solution to an expensive problem. CTV's Tony Grace explains.
On this quiet lane in the heart of Toronto, a neighborhood grocery store where inside everyone is an owner. From stocking shelves to the cash and the cleaning, they all have a stake in this co-op's success. Here for more than 50 years, but this month seeing a 60% jump in membership.
A lot of people, they're looking behind the rise in food prices, and they're frustrated that, at a time when a lot of people are struggling, that these larger grocery stores are posting record profits.
Members here pay a fee, but they see the finances, the locally sourced offerings, and the direct relationships with producers.
It's a great community of really purpose-driven folks here.
That philosophy of community ownership is motivating members of this co-op to ensure it's a long-term option in a large city where there are multiple grocery choices. But it's also at the heart of some emerging success stories in smaller communities.
It keeps growing all the time.
The Moonbeam Co-op in Northern Ontario is the only game in town, born when the community came together to save its only grocery store. More than a decade later, they've bought a piece of land to expand.
To me, it's very important, because we're a small town, so we need each other's back.
Canada has only a handful of smaller standalone and nonprofit co-ops. Hundreds of others are for-profit businesses and part of systems.
No matter the origins of co-ops, I think what is common among all of them is that they form generally out of some perceived need within the community or a period of immense discomfort.
Kootenay, BC co-op member John Steinman has written about the thousands of co-ops in North America.
Rather than see each other as competitors, we're generally cooperating with each other and learning from each other.
And says their success as a long-term alternative to grocery giants centers on a big question.
How uncomfortable do we need to get in order to be compelled to do more than just demand from someone else, like government or these large companies, to do something for us? What will it take for us to be compelled to do something for ourselves?
A challenge the 600-plus members here are determined to meet.
Many hands make light work.
In a landscape with more aisles than ever. Tony Grace, CTV News, Toronto.
All right, coming up for us.
This is swinging for the bleachers.
Hopes of a breakthrough for a debilitating disease. Plus, a grandson's precious cargo over the skies of BC. There's cautious optimism this week after researchers at Western University in London, Ontario, announced the possibility of a potential cure for ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. It's a deadly, debilitating disease that affects about 4,000 Canadians. CTV's Sarah Plowman has more details on the discovery and the reaction.
Her mind races, her body is stuck. Bonnie Pettin can't talk except through a computer. She was active, a massage therapist. More than 2.5 years after her ALS diagnosis, the disease has robbed her of all of that.
I'm living the nightmare instead of the dream.
This week, researchers at Western University shared a breakthrough.
I think we can reasonably look at this and say, this is swinging for the bleachers. We think that in 3 to 5 years, we'll be looking at something that might be cured.
ALS impairs nerve cells, causing weakness and death. In virtually all patients, a toxic protein builds up, killing the cell. Dr. Michael Strong and his team discovered another protein that could stop or reverse this, halting the disease's progression. They first tested flies, then mice, and found when animals with ALS were injected with a new protein like this mouse Lucy, they survived long after the animals without the protein.
Lucy was still around at 18 weeks.
A $10 million boost from a donor means human trials could start in 3 to 5 years. Researchers are optimistic, but also cautionary.
We're men, we're not mice.
Pettin has a name for the researchers.
Angels.
Bring it in. She says she'd take part in the trials if she could, as she battles symptoms, but also time.
I'm going to say hurry up because the people who have it now won't be alive in 5 years.
Researchers say what they found could be the key to unlocking a treatment not just for ALS, but also for other related neurological conditions, such as frontotemporal dementia. Sarah Plowman, CTV News, Fredericton.
Still ahead on thin ice. How warming waters are melting away tourist dollars for some communities in Newfoundland and Labrador. Newfoundland and Labrador is famous for its breathtaking icebergs. They draw tens of thousands of tourists to the province every year. But nowadays, there are fewer icebergs, and it's also becoming harder to see the ones that are there. CTV's Garrett Barry has the story.
These bergs have been as good as gold in Newfoundland. For years, tourists have flocked to these shores to catch a glimpse.
Oh, goodness, yes. I mean, they come from Europe, all over Asia.
It's always a boost for local business, but this year, expectations are melting. This season, icebergs are smaller and they're closer to the shoreline in Labrador, meaning they're more likely to melt before they get to tourist hotspots like Bonavista and Twillingate. You can blame the El Nino winter that warmed ocean waters and a long-term trend of warming global temperatures.
They melt further north, and we just don't see them as much. So this year, even though it's not an atypical year, it is representative, though, of what we've been seeing over the last 3 decades.
And on the waters here, boat tour operators like Iceberg Quest are adapting for what this season will bring.
We have one of the top coastlines in the world, for God's sake, and all kinds of birds and seabirds, and folks just want to get out on the water.
For some businesses, this scenery is only half the battle. Getting to rural Newfoundland, for some, has become a real challenge.
We actually had a family this year that booked their rooms with us and their flights, and they ended up having to cancel because the rentals were just astronomically high.
Across the country, a rental car shortage that started in the pandemic has eased up. But Newfoundland and Labrador, renting a car is still expensive. With prices quoted at more than $2,000 per week in the summer months, it's double what you might pay in Toronto.
Newfoundland has always been a real challenge because the season is very strong, but it's also very short. And getting vehicles on and off the island is challenging.
Luke Fisher says he's been able to find a few independent rental car companies with better rates for his customers. But he still believes expensive rentals are hurting the rural economy in the province. Garrett Barry, CTV News, St. John's.
After the break, a flight to remember, proving you are never too old to try new things. Take a look. We'll be right back with that. Finally tonight, the story of a grandmother and her grandson flying high over the skies of Vancouver Island. She's 96, and when he got his pilot's license recently, he knew she'd be one of his very first passengers. CTV's Adam Sawatsky with their journey.
Good to see you. To appreciate why this pair is preparing to board a plane,
okay, let's get you prepped.
You need to know what Colleen Goddard recently told her 13 grandchildren.
I love you all, my grandchildren, just equally. But only you has a plane.
But only her grandson, Ryan Goddard, had just crossed earning a pilot's license off his bucket list.
There's a lot of people that want to go flying, but I don't know if anyone else deserves to go flying more than my grandma.
Because his Gigi, Ryan says, has been inspiring him to live life to the fullest since he was a baby.
It's better to face challenges and be positive and just do things.
Like when Colleen initially declined his invitation.
I says, just remember, Ryan, I'm 96.
But despite that big number,
my legs hurt, but that's okay.
Eventually decided to not have an even bigger regret.
All right, Grandma, here we go.
So, instead of blaming adversity for keeping her grounded,
and we're flying, Grandma.
Oh, this is so beautiful.
Gigi found herself being thankful for the grandson who was lifting her up.
Oh,
how beautiful is that?
It's super.
And while they flew beside the mountains and over her home, there was that one moment he took his eyes off the gauges, followed by her turning away from the window.
Love you so much, Grandma.
And they both appreciated the most inspiring perspective of all.
I can't believe that I'm so lucky.
Me too. That's exactly how I feel too.
And after they landed,
A little bumpy, Grandma. Sorry about that.
Beautifully done.
The 96-year-old reflected on living through life's inevitable tailwinds and turbulence.
The downs don't matter that much because you can't change them. We can change ourselves. It's so marvelous. Doggone it anyway.
And you can choose, Ryan says, to be like his Gigi.
Her enjoyment of life, it's just so bright.
To fly through life fueled by gratitude.
You know, it might not be the last time.
I hope not, Grandma.
Pure joy.
Adam Sawatsky, CTV News, Campbell River.
And by the way, the two are planning more flights, maybe even a helicopter ride as well. That's it for us tonight. I'm Todd Vanderheyden. For Heather Butts and all of us here at CTV National News, thank you for watching. Have a great rest of your evening, and we'll see you again right here tomorrow.